morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. My name is Shari, and I'm the coordinator for the Holocaust Resource Center of the Jewish Federation of the Lehigh Valley. The Holocaust Resource Center exists to preserve the memory of the Holocaust, supporting the stories of local survivors and children of survivors, and challenging the community to uphold the theme of tolerance, which is the lesson that we must learn from this horrible tragedy. In Germany in the 1930s and all the way through World War II, stories based on stereotypes were spread about Jews. And I'd like to share some typical stories that were spread. Jewish children in their schools were made fun of when the other students threw pennies in the hallway and called to the Jewish students to go get them. When they did, the other non-Jewish students laughed at them and said that Jews were always running after money. Excuse me. One morning, a Jewish family woke up to find swastikas painted on the outside of their home. They couldn't look at their neighbors because they were afraid to protest. Maybe those neighbors were the one that had painted the swastikas. And finally, you may have heard the stereotype that Jewish people have horns on their heads. Imagine a little Jewish girl asked to bend over so that her non-Jewish classmate could check and see if she had horns. I've been working at the Holocaust Resource Center for a number of years and have studied many artifacts in our collection. Some of these items introduced me to the Romberg family. The survivors of that family gave us a collection of their personal items. Among them is a picture of a woman named Lucienne. And I take her photo with me to most talks, and although I really have no idea who she is, I do know some things about her for certain, and I can guess many others. And usually students that I meet with give me their ideas as well. So this is Lucienne. First, let me tell you, she is in a city called Cologne, Germany, and you can see that it is actually not fall, but it's January 29th, 1939. So I don't know if any other countries, but as far as I don't know, only in America do I know that you put the month and then the date and then the year. But in most European countries and a lot of other foreign countries, it's the day, then the month, then the year. So it's the 29th of January, 1939. She doesn't look distressed in any way. So someone said she was pretty, someone said she just looks normal. And she's smiling, and I know that she's sightseeing. This is the famous Cologne Cathedral, which you can go and visit today. It's a very famous landmark in that city. She's well dressed and she appears well off. Nothing looks particularly troublesome except for that Jewish star that she wears on her coat. This takes place just a few years after anti-Jewish laws were in place. Beginning in 1933 and reaching their pinnacle in 1935 with the Nuremberg laws, Jews were restricted from German life. Among those restrictions, Jews were not allowed to attend public schools, own library cards, have a driver's license, and they were restricted to separate park benches. Jewish businesses were often boycotted. Sometimes there were official boycott days. And Jews were defined racially as separate. Racially, not as a religion, not even considered to be citizens of the country they felt most comfortable in. So I'm going to show you an example of that. When you look at this passport, what do you first notice? Most people notice that there's a swastika on it. I can't get my cursor right now. And so most people say, if I asked whose passport is it, they would say, well, it's a Nazi party member. But every German citizen was a member of the Nazi Reich. Just like in the United States, if you have a passport, on your passport is a symbol of a country, an eagle or an American flag. During 1933 through 1945, all German passports had a swastika on them. Now, if you were Jewish, there was one important distinction. What do you notice about this passport? This is the inside page of a Jewish passport. Yes? All right, so there's a red J, you're exactly right, on the top of that passport. So that meant you were no longer German. You were the other. One more thing that made you feel even more humiliated and unimportant, you had to give up your name. To a certain extent, you were not your own person anymore. If you were a male, and it says in the middle of this passport, the gentleman's name is Rudolf Israel Romberg. His middle name was not really Israel. Any male had to change their middle name on their official papers to Israel, and any female on their official papers, their middle name was changed to Sarah. So you had to give up your name as well. Living in Nazi Germany was persecution in small steps. Lucienne doesn't look particularly distressed, even though she's not considered a citizen. For now, she can still move about the country fairly easily and live a fairly normal life. But maybe she thinks, like many did, that Hitler and the Nazis would disappear, that swastikas displayed by her neighbors would come down, that the German people would vote Hitler out and all the crazy talk against the Jews would go away. Things would be back to normal, and maybe she could take off the star that she wore. In her mind, and in the minds of many, there wasn't an emergency. But by 1939, the Nazis' war against the Jewish people was getting ready to explode. No neighbors stood up to protect you, and instead, they probably turned you into the authorities. You were deported or confined to ghettos or exterminated in camps. By 1942, there were no Jews left in Cologne. 11,000 Jews of the city had been deported to concentration camps, labor camps, or death camps. By the end of World War II, 6 million Jews had died at the hands of the Nazis. Finally, I want to leave you with one more message, and it's not just that the Holocaust was some huge, tragic, horrible event during World War II. Of course it was, but there's a lesson in it. As part of my work, I teach Holocaust to students around the Lehigh Valley. Recently, I was working with a group of students to understand the rise of the Nazi Party, and we covered all the usual reasons, which I'm sure you all have covered too. From German humiliation at the defeat of World War I, economic turmoil and constant political upheaval, but most importantly, Hitler was able to offer words that people wanted to hear, promises of jobs and German pride. In other words, he knew the right way to manipulate his audience. And at the same time he was offering promises, Hitler never swayed from a message of how all the troubles of Germany could be blamed squarely on the Jews. Who were these Nazis that listened to Hitler, voted for Hitler, joined the Nazi Party? Who were they? Well, they were mostly everyday citizens. Some were businessmen and bankers, some were trash collectors or farmers. From many walks of life, in the end, they all had one thing in common. They were bystanders. They listened to the messages, but instead of speaking up to question the words, they kept silent. Today, no matter if it's a political leader you see on TV or read about in the paper, if it's a friend that you admire at school, you have to be ready to listen with your ears open. And sometimes we have to learn to respond with our mouths open. If words are hurtful, harmful, prejudiced, intolerant, we can't follow along and think, who can take that seriously? Look where that ended for the Jewish community of Europe. The real message is easy. Don't be a bystander. By the way, do you remember the stories at the beginning I told you about the kids in school with the pennies, the jokes, the peoples whose home was painted, etc.? I sort of tricked you. Although they sound like stories that happened in the 1930s leading up to the Holocaust, those were all stories that have happened right now, mostly here in the Lehigh Valley, except for the little girl who had to have her head checked for horns. That was me, and I was 10 years old at the time. The timeline of the Holocaust may have happened happened 70 years ago, but we all know that anti-Semitism still happens, that racism still happens, that bullying still happens. By participating today, you have a large responsibility. Elie Wiesel, whom I'm sure you're all well familiar with now, a survivor of the Holocaust and famous American author, said, "When you listen to a witness, you become a witness." As you listen to Michelle's and Donald's stories, keep in mind that you now become the storyteller, the one that is charged with passing along the truth of the Holocaust to future generations. Thank you, and I'd like to introduce Michelle Levy.